Thanksgiving dinner smelled like apple cider, and 40 years of being taken for granted. My son stood at the head of the table, the same table I'd built by hand in 1987, and clinked his fork against his glass. The room quieted. My daughter-in-law smiled the way she always did when she wanted something, soft at the edges but hard at the center. I sat near the window, hands folded, a plain manila envelope resting on my lap where no one could see it. "We have an announcement," my son said, his voice carrying the easy confidence of a man who had never once doubted himself. "Dad's agreed to let us manage things going forward. The finances, the property, all of it. It's just easier this way." He looked at me then. "Not to confirm. To dare." I nodded once. Slowly. I reached under the table. I set the envelope down in front of him. "Open it," I said. He did. And the room never sounded the same again. Before I tell you the rest, let me tell you how we got there. Because the ending only makes sense if you understand the beginning. And the beginning, like most quiet disasters, started with something that looked like love. My wife Carol passed 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 2 months from diagnosis to the last morning I held her hand. She went the way she lived, without complaint, without drama, without asking anyone to carry what she could carry herself. She was the kind of woman people describe as steady. I always thought that word was too small for her, but I understood why they used it. She was the ground beneath everything. After she was gone, the house felt like a museum. Every room held something of hers. The kitchen still had her handwriting on the spice jars. The garden she'd replanted every spring sat untended for 2 full seasons before I finally went out with a shovel and tried to remember what she'd planted where. I never did get it exactly right. My son came around more after the funeral. I was glad for it at first. He'd moved back to town with his wife a few years earlier, bought a place across the neighborhood, and for a while, it felt like the kind of life I'd always imagined. Sunday dinners, help with the yard, someone to call when the furnace made a sound it shouldn't. His wife was polite in the way that certain people are polite, precisely, carefully, as a strategy. She asked questions about Carol, nodded at the answers, touched my arm at the right moments. I liked her well enough, or I thought I did. What I was really doing was believing in a version of her she'd constructed for my benefit. The changes came slowly, the way water damage does. You don't see it until the ceiling starts to bow. First, she suggested I consolidate my accounts. Just for simplicity. Dad. Everything in one place, easier to track. My son echoed it a week later, like he'd just thought of it himself. I moved 3 accounts into one. He was added as a joint holder for emergencies. Then she started mentioning my memory. Not to me at first, but around me. At his sister's birthday dinner, I heard her tell my nephew that I'd been confused about dates lately. I hadn't been. When I mentioned it to my son later, he looked at me with something that wasn't quite concern and wasn't quite dismissal, some crafted expression in between. "She's just worried about you, Dad. We both are." Then came the realtor. I came home one Tuesday afternoon to find a woman I'd never met sitting at my kitchen table with a folder and a tablet, smiling at my daughter-in-law. When she saw me, the smile flickered. My daughter-in-law said, smooth and immediate, I asked her to come by just to give us a sense of the market. No pressure, just information. She patted the chair beside her like I was being invited to discuss the weather. I sat down. I smiled. I said nothing. But that night, I called my brother-in-law, Carol's younger brother, a man named George who'd practiced real estate law for 30 years before he retired. I told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Raymond, tell me everything. Start from the beginning." So I did. What followed over the next few weeks was quiet, methodical, and invisible. George came over on a Wednesday while my son and daughter-in-law were at a conference in Denver. We sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and I spread out every document I could find. The mortgage, the trust Carol and I had set up in 2008, the joint account, the investment accounts, the deed. George read everything twice. He made notes in a small green notebook with a mechanical pencil. When he was done, He set the pencil down and looked at me the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. Not alarmed, but serious. "You've still got control of everything," he said. "Your name is primary on all of it. But there are 3 documents here with your signature that I don't think you signed." I asked him what he meant. He laid them side by side. "A beneficiary change form on my life insurance, a power of attorney filed last spring, and a consent form for an investment transfer of $42,000 to an account I didn't recognize." My signature on all 3 looked close, but not quite right. The way a copy of a key looks like the original until you try to use it. I sat back in my chair and looked at Carol's handwriting on the cinnamon jar above the stove. Her name, in blue ink, slightly tilted, the way she always wrote. I thought about the kind of person she was, about the kind of person I wanted to be. "George," I said, "I need 6 weeks." He nodded. He already understood. We moved carefully and without announcement. George contacted a forensic document specialist, a woman he trusted from a case years back. She compared the signatures in question against 20 verified samples and submitted a written analysis professional, precise, unambiguous. The conclusions were what I already suspected. Meanwhile, I made a change of my own. I had a small device installed in the kitchen, behind the clock on the wall. Audio only. I didn't listen in real time. I let it record and pulled the files every few days on my laptop in the garage with the door closed. The first useful recording came on a Wednesday night. My daughter-in-law's voice, low and certain. "He won't notice until it's already done. He's too comfortable." My son. "And if he does," her. "Then we say it was a misunderstanding. He gets confused. Everyone already thinks so." My son. After a pause. "He doesn't seem confused to me." Her. Immediately. "That's not the point." I listened to it 3 times. Not because I needed to hear it again, but because I wanted to understand exactly what I was dealing with. This wasn't impulsive greed. It was planned. She had been laying the groundwork for months, establishing the narrative that I was unreliable, forgetting things, slipping not because it was true, but because it would be useful later. She was building a case. So was I. George and I met at a diner on Route 9 every Thursday morning. He drank black coffee, I had eggs, and we went through the growing file like a pair of accountants closing out a quarter. The forged documents, the financial transfers, the recordings, the beneficiary changes. He drafted letters, made calls, and at one point contacted a detective he knew who specialized in elder financial abuse. "Raymond," he said one morning, pushing a folder across the table. "If you wanted to take this to court, you'd win." I already knew that. "I'm not going to court," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "I want them to understand what they've done in front of the people they've been lying to. I want the story to end where it started at the table." George was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "You always were the patient one. Carol used to say so." I looked out the window at the parking lot. The early November sky flat and pale above the tree line. She used to say, I was too patient. He laughed. She was usually right. The Thanksgiving announcement was my daughter-in-law's idea, which I found appropriate. She had orchestrated everything else. It made sense that she would orchestrate this too and hand me the stage herself. She called me the week before and suggested we host the holiday together at my house. Her family, my side, neighbors who'd been close for years. A real gathering, she said. Something warm. I told her it sounded lovely. I told her I'd make sure the house looked nice. The morning of Thanksgiving, I drove to George's house before dawn. We sat at his table, went through everything one final time. The envelope was already prepared, thick with copies, the forensic report, the recordings summarized and labeled, the financial transfers with dates and account numbers, the power of attorney with the forged signature highlighted, and a letter from George on his firm's letterhead outlining the legal exposure they were facing. "You're sure you want to do it this way?" George asked. "They chose a public forum," I said. "I'm meeting them there. What if your son—" "My son made his choices," I said. It came out quieter than I expected. "That doesn't mean I don't love him. It means I understand him now." George nodded slowly. He drove me home. The house was full by 5. My daughter-in-law had strung lights around the mantel. She'd replaced the centerpiece. Carol always used a ceramic pumpkin I'd bought at a craft fair in 1994 with something from a home goods store, all matte gold and fresh eucalyptus. I set the ceramic pumpkin on the windowsill in the hallway where I could see it from the table. My granddaughter, Emma, arrived with her mother, my son's daughter from his first marriage, now 22, studying to be a nurse. She hugged me at the door and whispered, "You look good, Grandpa." I told her she was a terrible liar and she laughed, and that was the best moment of the whole evening. The dinner went the way these things go. People found their seats. Wine was poured. Someone said grace. My daughter-in-law was radiant in the way of a person whose plan is going exactly right. My son stood, the fork on the glass. The room hushed. He said it with such practiced warmth that for a moment I almost believed he believed it. He thanked everyone for coming, said something about family being the most important thing, and then pivoted smooth, rehearsed into announcing that he'd taken over management of my finances and the property, that it was a family decision made with my best interests at heart, that they were looking at some updates to the house in the new year. He mentioned, gently, that I'd been forgetting appointments. He said the word care several times. He looked at me at the end, expectant, waiting for the grateful nod, the quiet acceptance, the old man's agreement that yes, it was all very reasonable. I placed the envelope on the table. My daughter-in-law's eyes went to it immediately. A reflex. She couldn't stop. "Before we make any announcements," I said, my voice even and unhurried, "I thought this would be a good moment to share something myself." My son picked up the envelope. He opened it the way you open something you're already slightly afraid of, carefully, with 2 fingers, as if the paper itself might cut him. He read the first page. His face went very still. My daughter-in-law leaned over. She read 2 lines and sat back. "What is this?" he said. Not a question. Something flatter. "It's a forensic analysis of 3 documents bearing my signature," I said. "Documents I didn't sign. There's also a summary of 4 months of financial transfers from my accounts to one I didn't open. And there's a copy of a conversation recorded in my kitchen." I paused. "Your kitchen now, I suppose, since that's the arrangement you've been describing to people." The table was silent the way a room gets silent when something private becomes public all at once. My neighbor Walt, who'd known me for 26 years, set his fork down carefully. My daughter-in-law said with impressive composure, "Raymond, I think there's been a misunderstanding." "There has been," I said. "You misunderstood who you were dealing with." She opened her mouth. I spoke first, calmly. "I'm 64 years old. I built this house's back addition with my own hands. I ran a civil engineering firm for 31 years. I was married to a woman who was smarter than either of us, and she raised me well enough to know when something wasn't adding up." I looked at my son. "I'm not confused. I haven't been confused. What I've been is quiet." My son looked at the papers in his hand. He looked at them the way a person looks at something when the ground has shifted and they're still trying to find their footing. George, who had arrived quietly during dinner and was sitting at the far end of the table, spoke then. He introduced himself. He explained, without theater, what the documents showed. He mentioned the legal terms calmly, the way a retired lawyer does with precision but without performance. He said the words, elder financial fraud. He said the words, forged signature. He said the words documented and time-stamped. Emma, across the table, had her hand over her mouth. My daughter-in-law tried twice to reframe it. Both times, George responded with a specific date and a specific dollar amount. After the second time, she stopped talking. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The truth was already in the room, and truth, when it's been documented carefully, doesn't need volume. I stood. I picked up Carol's ceramic pumpkin from the windowsill on my way to the door. At the threshold, I turned. "I've already spoken with an attorney about the next steps," I said. "George has the contact information if anyone needs to reach me. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the evening." I drove to the hotel I'd booked 3 days earlier. Small room, 2nd floor, window facing the parking lot. I ordered room service, ate at the small table, and sat for a long time looking at the pumpkin on the nightstand. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. Triumph is for people who wanted a fight. I'd wanted, for a long time, not to need one. What I felt was closer to the feeling after a very long drive, tired, and relieved that it was over, and uncertain about the road ahead. I called George. He answered on the second ring. "How are you?" he said. I thought about it. "I'm exactly where I decided to be," I said. "That's enough for tonight." The calls came the next morning. My son first 3 times before 8 a.m. I let them go to voicemail. The messages moved from confused to apologetic in a way that told me he'd spent the night thinking rather than strategizing, which was perhaps the most honest thing he'd done in a year. My daughter-in-law called once and left no message. My nephew called at 9. Said simply, "Uncle Raymond, I'm sorry I didn't say anything sooner. I heard things, and I should have called you." I told him I appreciated it. I told him everyone sees what they're prepared to see. Emma texted, "Can I come see you? I'm buying coffee. Don't argue." She showed up 40 minutes later with 2 cups and the same coat she'd been wearing since college. A big corduroy thing that made her look like she'd borrowed it from a friendlier decade. She sat across from me at the small hotel table and didn't try to fill the silence with the wrong words, which told me her mother had raised her well. "Did you know?" I asked eventually. "Not about the documents," she said. "But I knew something was wrong. Vanessa." She stopped. "She talked about you differently when she thought I wasn't listening. Like you were a problem to be managed." I nodded. "I should have said something." "You're saying something now," I said. She looked at her coffee cup. "Are you okay, Grandpa?" I looked at her grandmother's eyes looking back at me, that particular shade of gray-green that Carol had, the kind of eyes that paid attention. I thought about what it meant to answer that question honestly. "I'm going to be," I said. That's the truest answer I have. Over the following weeks, things moved with the quiet efficiency of systems doing what systems are designed to do. George filed the relevant paperwork. The accounts were untangled. The forged documents were submitted to the appropriate parties. My son retained his own attorney, which I had expected. The process was not pleasant, but it was clean. He called me once, 3 weeks out. Not through lawyers. His own voice, uncertain in a way I hadn't heard since he was young and had broken something he knew I valued. "Dad," he said. I didn't know about the signatures. I believed him, which was the hardest part. I think he had told himself that the account management was helping me, that the realtor conversations were practical, that the word confused, dropped into enough conversations, was protection rather than strategy. I think he had let his wife build the architecture of the plan while he stood in the rooms she built and told himself it was reasonable. "That's not the same as not being responsible," I said. Silence. "I know," he said. We didn't say much more that call, but we stayed on the line for a few minutes, which felt like its own kind of language. Neither of us ready to hang up. Neither of us ready for what comes after. I sold the house in January. Not to them, to a young couple, a physical therapist and a high school teacher, who walked through every room twice and asked if the back addition had been built by a professional. I told them it had been built by a civil engineer who'd rebuilt it once, when his wife said the angles were off, and rebuilt it again when she said the light was wrong, and hadn't touched it after that because on the 3rd try, it was exactly what she wanted. The wife laughed. The husband said, "She sounds like someone I know." They made a full-price offer by the end of the week. I handed over the keys myself. The teacher asked if I wanted a moment alone inside. I said no. I'd already had all the moments I needed. The house had been a good house. Now it would be good for someone else. I moved into a smaller place, a 2-bedroom rental above a frame shop near the center of town. It had tall windows and old radiators that clanged cheerfully in the cold, and a neighbor on the 2nd floor named Patricia, who taught piano, and whose students filed up and down the stairs on Tuesday afternoons with the solemnity of small pilgrims. I bought a good desk, put Carol's photograph on it, the one from the summer we drove up to Maine and she fell asleep in the passenger seat with her hand out the window, fingers trailing in the warm air. I put my father's pocket watch beside it, and one drawing my son had made for me when he was 6, a house with 4 windows and a very large sun, and 2 stick figures labeled Dad and Me in his early, uneven printing. I kept it because the boy who drew it was real. Whatever happened after, that boy was real. Emma came on Sunday afternoons. She brought food sometimes, or books, or nothing at all. One afternoon, she brought a box of Carol's recipe cards that she'd kept in her apartment since we'd cleared the house. She'd asked if she could have them years before, and I'd said yes without quite registering that she'd taken them. She set the box on my desk and said, "I thought maybe you'd want to have them back." I opened the box and looked at Carol's handwriting moving through index cards, recipes for things I hadn't made in a decade. Apple cake, the lamb stew she only made in winter, the cornbread her mother had taught her, with the margin note in her hand that read, "Less sugar than the recipe says, always. You keep them," I said. Emma looked at me. "Learn them," I said. "Make them for people you love. That's what they're for." She took the box home. The following Sunday, she came back with a container of the cornbread. It wasn't exactly right, a little denser than Carol's. The top a shade too brown, but it was close enough that I ate 2 pieces standing at the kitchen counter without sitting down. My son came to see me once, on a Tuesday in February. He called first, asked if I was willing. I said yes. He looked older in a way that had nothing to do with age. He sat in the chair across from my desk and looked at the photograph of Carol and at the drawing he'd made when he was 6 and didn't say anything for a long moment. "I keep thinking," he said finally, "about the year you taught me to tile a bathroom floor. Do you remember that?" I did. He'd been 19. He'd done 3 tiles and then stood back and declared it boring, and I'd made him finish the entire room. "I thought it was pointless," he said. "You made me finish it anyway. The floor didn't care whether you found it interesting," I said. He smiled faintly. Then the smile faded. "I'm sorry, Dad." He said it simply, without theater. The way real apologies come without the extra words people add when they're more concerned with being forgiven than with the thing they did. I looked at him. My son. The boy who thought my arms were strong enough to carry anything. The man who had stood at a Thanksgiving table and announced my erasure to people who'd known me for decades. "I know," I said. He waited. "That's not the same as us being all right," I said. "But it's somewhere to start from." He nodded. He didn't ask what came next, which told me something had shifted. The version of him that wanted things managed and arranged and resolved on a timeline was quiet. What was left was just a man sitting in a chair, uncertain, without an agenda. We talked for 2 hours. Not about the legal matters. About his mother. About a road trip we'd taken in 1999 that went wrong in every possible direction and ended with us laughing in a parking lot in Georgia over a paper map that had led us the wrong way twice. About the bathroom tiles. About things you forget until you're sitting across from someone and the room gets quiet enough to hear them again. When he left, he stopped at the door. "Can I come back?" he said. "Tuesday," I said. "Bring something for lunch." He came the following Tuesday and the one after. We didn't talk about his wife. We didn't talk about what happened. We talked the way men do when they're rebuilding something around the edges first, testing the frame before trusting any weight to it. I don't know where it ends. I'm not sure it's supposed to end anywhere. I think what Carol was trying to tell me, in the letter she wrote before the surgery, was not that I should expect a tidy finish. She was saying something simpler and harder. She was saying, build, not because you'll be thanked for it, not because it will last, but because that's what you are, a man who builds things. So build. I started volunteering at the public library 2 mornings a week. Cataloging, repairs, the kind of work that asks nothing of you except patience and attention. There was a boy who came in on Thursdays, 12 years old, enormous backpack, the quiet watchfulness of a kid who reads because the world inside books is safer than the one he lives in. He reminded me of no one I could name, which meant he reminded me of everyone. One Thursday he sat at my table, opened a book he'd read before you can tell by how a kid holds a book they love, less carefully, more like a conversation, and said without looking up, "Why do people act nice when they want something?" I thought about it. "Because they're afraid that who they really are won't be enough," I said. He turned a page. "Was that person nice when they wanted something?" I didn't ask him who he meant. "For a while," I said. He nodded slowly. My uncle does that. We sat in the quiet of the library. Two people with different reasons for needing the same thing. A place where the words mean what they say. Spring came the way it does in New England. Reluctantly, then all at once. The frame shop below me had a new display in the window. Patricia's students started leaving the window open during lessons, and I could hear the piano from the desk where I worked in the afternoons. Scales, stumbles, the occasional clean phrase that made it through. Emma brought me a plant. I killed it within 3 weeks and texted her a photograph of it as evidence, and she sent back a string of laughing faces and showed up the following Sunday with a cactus. This one's harder to disappoint, she said. I put it on the windowsill. It lived. I watered it every 10 days, which is apparently all it needed. I found that instructive. The last time I thought about the Thanksgiving table, really thought about it, turned it over the way you do when you're trying to understand something, rather than simply remember it. I was sitting at my desk early one morning, coffee going cold, looking at Carol's photograph. I thought about what my daughter-in-law had said in the kitchen that Wednesday night. He's too comfortable. She meant it as a weakness. Comfortable men don't notice. Comfortable men don't act. She was wrong, but not in the way she'd expect. Comfort isn't blindness. Sometimes it's the thing that makes you patient enough to wait for the whole truth, rather than reacting to the first version of it. Sometimes, comfortable men have been watching longer than anyone realizes, building something quiet and solid. The way you build a back addition, not fast, not for show, but level, and made to last. I took out a piece of paper and wrote 4 words at the top. A man who waited. Then I crossed that out and wrote 4 different words. A man who knew. I set down the pen. Outside, the morning was coming in through the tall windows, falling across the desk, across Carol's photograph, across the pocket watch, and the child's drawing, and the small, stubborn cactus on the sill. I had not gotten back everything I lost. I didn't expect to. Some things, once broken, become something different when you put them back together. And different isn't always worse. The house was gone, and I didn't miss it the way I thought I would. What I missed was who lived in it. And what I'd found, slowly and without announcement, was that the best of what we'd built there hadn't stayed in the walls. It had stayed in the people who'd sat at the table when the table still meant something. Emma, with her cornbread. My son, with his Tuesday lunches and his careful silences. The boy at the library and his too heavy backpack. The piano scales rising through the floor every Tuesday afternoon, imperfect and trying, which is its own kind of music. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold. I drank it anyway. I had nowhere to be for another 2 hours, and I found that I was, for the first time in a very long time, entirely at peace with that. If this story meant something to you, I'd be glad if you'd share it. Leave a comment below, tell me where you're listening from today. And if you know someone who needed to hear this, send it to them. Because sometimes the most important thing one person can do for another is say, "You are not alone in this, and you are not without options. Thank you for being here with me."